Hello, Year 10. I'm just going to talk you through the work that I'm setting you this week for your home learning. Okay, so the first objective is to read through and listen to the PowerPoint presentation, which you're doing now, thank you. The second thing is to choose an artwork by your chosen artist. So you started, or hopefully you completed your A5 drawing last week. I'm expecting you to look at the same artist, but not necessarily the same piece of work. So choose the piece of work that you feel you are going to be able to talk about confidently. And I would like you, as you're completing your analysis, to Google the following. So the genre of the artwork that you're looking at. So that means, is it still life, landscape, portrait? And as an easier way of understanding or a more straightforward use of language, people, places, or things. Okay, so that would describe the genre. I'd like you to note the date the artwork was completed or created, what was happening at the same time in the news. So this will be very straightforward, by the way, that particular point, if you are looking at a contemporary artist, somebody who's maybe quite current, because it's literally what's going on at the moment and you are the experts on that. I would also like you to Google any related artists. So these usually come up on your search bar if you use Google Images. You'll find that you've got other artists that are similar. If you're not getting many of them, then potentially you're probably looking at a contemporary artist. Again, you're the experts on what's going on at the moment, so that should be fairly straightforward. So we are using the framework of using the 3 C's to write an in-depth essay analysing your choice of artists. So some of you have already written analysis, but this is different. I'm expecting you to do it in a more in-depth way. Next slide. Okay, so I'd like you to choose an artist that explores a different, not yet considered approach to one of the following: subject, composition, formal elements of line, tone, shape, form, colour, texture, and pattern. Next slide. Okay, so this is a step-by-step guide for aspirational students using the 3 C's. So if you are writing about an artwork in this much depth, that is aspirational. This will almost certainly lead you to get a much higher mark for your artist analysis. Okay, next slide. Step 1, so you're going to be asked to describe content, subject, composition, formal elements, line, tone, shape and form, colour, texture and pattern. Next slide. The second step is you're going to be looking at connections, so historical, personal, so that might include the artist's biography, it might include the social context, it absolutely does not have to, and I'm hoping that when I go through this that will become more clear. And thirdly, any artistic influences. And finally, step 3, because it's 3 C's, the comments and conclusions. So in step 3, I'm expecting you to reflect on content and connections, start to think about your own opinions about underlying messages in the artwork. So I want you to consider a narrative, whether there is a narrative, so something that happened before the picture suggests, or something that is going on within the work, or something that potentially might happen after. Metaphor, so you're all familiar with this from English, but objects and subjects that are used to represent something else. Atmosphere or mood, so whether the art evokes an audience reaction, and the audience, and what that is about you, what reaction do you, the audience, have to the work. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what I've done is taken an artist. I know quite a lot of you are looking at this artist, Jim Dine, and I have basically followed the 3 C's in a worked example. I'm going to talk you through it, and even if you're not looking at the artist Jim Dine, I would just like you to go through this with me. So first of all, I've looked at content. So it's the piece of work on the left. This is a still life of everyday objects, in this case tools. The tools are arranged in no particular order, viewed from above looking straight down, which is an unusual perspective actually for a still life. Traditionally they were sort of more of an arrangement. This perspective makes them appear flat. The tools are man-made and are evenly spread across the composition. Lines are repeated verticals and horizontals. The painting is monochrome, so that's when you only use one colour, or black and white. Tone is being created with shades of grey. The white background emphasises the simple forms and provides contrast. The only thing I want to say about the content And if you are doing this with me, if you're ready to go because you've done a little bit of background research on Google, you can hit pause after I've just finished this sentence. The only thing I would say about, want to draw your attention to about content is that I'm not drawing any conclusions from anything I've just written there. I'm just basically doing a very basic description. Okay, and then in the next 2Cs, I will start looking in a bit more depth. Okay, either pause because you're going to write it or move on to the next slide. Okay, so next I'm going to look at the connections. So remember, this is about context, so the historical, social, maybe looking at biography, and also potentially looking at other artists working at the same time. So Jim Dine is an American artist. Sorry, I forgot to mention it can also include geographical context. So he's an American artist working in the 1960s. This work is similar to other pop artists who were working at the same time because Dine is studying everyday objects. These sort of objects would be very familiar to the artist, who is a painter and a practical person used to using his hands. He would have pliers for building and stretching his canvases, hammers for attaching canvas to the frame, and brushes obviously for painting. The tools would also be familiar to builders, decorators, mechanics, everyday people. As a still life artist, he may also have used the objects symbolically to represent something else as visual metaphors. The title of the painting is Tools of the Earth. This could give us an idea of the artist's message. So again, I'm just talking about the geography, the history, like what's going on at the same time, artists that are related. I've also referred to the title. You may not be able to, but generally, in most cases, you can find the title of the painting, and it's usually a pretty good clue as to what the artist's message might have been. They don't, they don't completely explain what their thinking is, but the title is their way of hinting to you. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so finally I'm drawing comments and conclusions. So the white background used in this painting is unusual in a still life painting. It creates a simple, graphic, almost childish appearance. That was one of the things that I noticed first of all. I thought it looks like a child working on white paper. So there's something quite simple about that. The repeated shapes create areas of pattern. I can imagine this being used as a wallpaper or fabric design. My first reaction to this painting was that it was a very familiar sight. I have tools like this lying around the house, at work, and in my home when I was young. The lack of colour made me notice the shapes and use of repetition. Looking at these shapes made me appreciate how strong and robust the tools are. Like so many things that we consume, they have the potential to last a long time and to help many people get the job done. As a practical person, I'm attached to my tools, and I'm completely lost if I can't find them. The title of the painting made me question what the meaning or symbolism might be. Tools of the earth might imply the relationship workers have with the soil. My interpretation of the earth represents the planet and the fact that these tools are universal, used all over the world to create, fix, and allow people to express themselves. These tools and this artwork can be appreciated by everyone, no matter what their language is, no matter how rich or poor they are, and no matter how well educated. You can be illiterate and still know how to create something with a hammer and saw. These tools allow people to express themselves, help one another, and improve their lives. I think Jim Dine was being humble and was reaching out to every man with his work. His work is relatable and can be appreciated and understood by any audience. At the time, the art world was elitist, and people would often leave galleries feeling alienated and stupid. Dime was following the pop art principles of having mass appeal. Okay, so if I put those 3 paragraphs together, I think I would probably have something approaching an essay. I just want to refer to 2 things that I've talked about in that paragraph. So first of all, I'm writing in the first person quite a lot because I'm talking about my reaction because I am the audience. So you don't need to research into people who've critics who've talked about the artwork, or you don't need to go to galleries and start interviewing people because you are the audience. So you can trust your own eyes, trust your own opinions. There are lots of different ways for any artwork that you look at for it to be that it could be interpreted. For example, when I spoke to my husband about this artwork and the title of the painting, which did have me thinking for a bit, Tools of the Earth, he had a kind of archaeological interpretation of it that, going right back to the Stone Ages, you know, one of the bits of evidence that we have of man's ability to create and innovate is the ancient tools that we find, going right back to those traditional flint tools. So you can see there, completely different interpretation from mine, and it's not wrong either. So if you've got an opinion about how you might interpret the work, then that's the idea. That's the whole point of art, that different people can have different interpretations. But if you haven't researched the context at all, then potentially you can get it completely wrong. For example, if you interpreted this as a modern audience, you might say, well, these tools look vintage, but at the time in the 1960s, they wouldn't have looked vintage. So it is quite important that you just do that small amount of research. But please do not think, oh, well, I can't find the artist bibliography, biography. I can't find the exact date the painting was painted, so therefore I can't find anything out about context, because really you can go on very little information and talk quite extensively about context. So I've talked here about mass appeal and the idea of not being elitist, but there are numerous other issues that will be tackled by artists. For example, Kelly Remston, who I looked at when I was doing my A5 drawing, I'm hoping that most of you can see that she's addressing gender stereotypes by, you know, having her female subjects, the women in her work, dressed in ridiculous cocktail dresses when they're wielding axes and chainsaws. So she's kind of addressing maybe the impracticality of women's clothing, the idea that women conform to gender stereotypes by what they choose to wear that doesn't necessarily suit the work they're doing. The way that she cuts their head off, you know, whenever you cut somebody's head off or don't include their head in the artwork, obviously you're removing their identity, and so that's, you know, that could potentially be about objectification. There are artists that have environmental messages, there are artists that have political messages, and we've talked about all of this, and by looking at those and noticing and acknowledging those deeper meanings, the deeper messages, you are going to be looking at a much higher grade. And I have to say, if you are, the way that I've just talked you through analysing artwork is very similar to the way that I would be encouraging A-level students to talk about their artwork. So try hard on this, and there's every possibility that you could get yourself a really high mark. You're working at home, but I'm really keen for you to keep learning and to keep making progress and to have some really good quality artist analysis. I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks for listening. That was 12 minutes. I really hope you're all getting on okay. We're missing you, and hopefully it's not going to be, oh, I don't know, don't want to say too much, but I think you are going to be the first year group that come back, so hopefully it won't be too long before we see you again. Good luck with that. Please do make sure you email your work. Some of you I'm not getting very much back from at all. In fact, some of you didn't even complete the 20 questions last week, and that will be noticed not just by me but by leadership team and even by Mr. Tutt himself. So can you please make sure that you are getting the work done, because if not, it will all be waiting for you and potentially there just will not be time for you to catch up. Okay, good luck. Thanks.